signs were prepared and positioned near the front entrance. Having spent the majority of the last couple of days perfecting them, now came the challenging part, ascending the stairs into the master bedroom. I swiftly stripped the bed, maneuvered the mattress off the queen-size frame, and half lifted, half slid it downstairs through the hallway, out the front door, and onto the lawn adjacent to the street. Returning inside, I rolled the slats and bedclothes downstairs, following them outside and adding them to the pile beside the mattress. After another trip upstairs, I dismantled the side rails and swiftly transported them outside. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was 4:22. Time was of the essence. I needed to finish by 5. Reassembling the bed took until 4:35. Next up was the kitchen table, light enough for me to handle alone. I angled it sideways through the door and placed it beside the bed in the yard. The last item was the 6x8 throw rug in the living room. After rolling it up, I joined it with the other items in the yard, erected the signs, and proudly observed the time, 4:55. Just 10 minutes until my wife's return. Stepping into the middle of the street, I surveyed my handiwork. It was a sight to behold, almost bringing a tear to my eye. Our marriage bed, the kitchen table, and throw rug, 3 places I knew had been used by my wife and her lover repeatedly over the past 6 months. The signs, perfectly placed and out of reach, completed the same. I approached each piece of furniture and read aloud the large sign in front of it. These items are yours for the taking. Free, they are no longer wanted in this house. If you are able to stomach the stench of infidelity and broken vows, help yourself. The sign above the bed detailed my wife's infidelity, specifying her regular liaisons with her lover over the past 6 months. Above the kitchen table, another sign recounted their activities, typically just before she served me dinner. On the throw rug, a sign indicated their preference for that spot. Each sign was adorned with a 17 by 24-inch photo of the adulterous couple in the act. Behind the table, a 5th sign revealed the identity of my wife's lover, Greg Allen, her boss at Mitchell, Price and Allen, recently married with 3 children, unaware of his wife's actions, but not for long. The time was 4:57, just in time. She would be home any minute. As I turned to assess the gathering crowd of neighbors and the increasing number of halted cars, some onlookers phoned friends or the police. I nonchalantly acknowledged the gathering and retreated into the house, closing the door behind me. Precisely at 5:00, my wife's car rounded the corner. Observing the commotion near our house, she slowed down, her gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding on our lawn. I imagined her focusing on the furniture and signs, particularly the large photos of her and Greg Allen engaged in their illicit activities, their expressions captured in moments of lust and pleasure. Even with her car window between us, amidst the crowd of 40 or 50 onlookers, I still heard her desperate cry, "No, oh, God, no." Finally, her gaze shifted from the signs to the front window of our house, where she spotted me standing. We locked eyes. She appeared devastated, her complexion drained, tears streaming down her cheeks. It seemed as if she was questioning me, mirroring my own bewilderment. I observed her for a moment before turning away, drawing the curtain shut behind me. Perhaps now is the time to recount how my wife, Sherry, and I ended up in this tragic situation. My name is Jack Meyer. I met Sherry during our junior year of college, introduced by a mutual friend. Instantly, I was captivated. Sherry wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she possessed an irresistible charm. Standing at 5'2", with striking blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, she had a petite yet perfectly proportioned figure that enchanted me. From that moment, I was smitten, never doubting my ability to win her heart. Sherry and I began dating, quickly becoming inseparable. Within a month, we shared our first closeness, an experience unlike any other. I was consumed by my love for Sherry, unable to get enough of her. Though we were not maidens, our passion for each other was all-consuming. Every moment together was blissful, every touch electric. Our love deepened over the years. After graduating, we married and settled into our first home, a condo in Van. Sherry pursued a career in real estate, while I found work in electronic manufacturing. We built a life together that I believed to be perfect. For the next 13 years, we shared an idyllic existence, first in our condo and later in our dream home. As our finances improved, we welcomed our children, Shelby, now 8, and Ryan, now 6, whom we adored beyond measure. Our family was our world. So, what went wrong? I wish I had the answers. I wish I had noticed the subtle signs indicating something was amiss. But I was oblivious. living in a bubble of love and trust. It took an unexpected event, our daughter, Shelby, falling ill at school, to uncover the truth. It was a Thursday when I received the call from the school nurse just before noon, informing me of Shelby's illness. In the midst of a staff meeting, I asked the nurse to contact my wife. Despite attempts to reach her at her office and on her cell, she was unreachable. So the nurse called me. Recognizing the urgency of fetching my daughter, I apologized to my staff and hurried to Shelby's school to retrieve her. Upon reaching home, upon opening the garage, I was startled by an unfamiliar car parked in my spot beside my wife's. Instantly, a lump formed in my throat and my stomach churned. No, it couldn't be, I reassured myself. My wife, the woman I cherished above all else, couldn't possibly be having an affair. But why was there a strange car in the garage with the door closed? Something was amiss, and I needed answers. I couldn't expose my daughter to this uncertainty. I instructed Shelby to stay in the car for a moment, explaining that the exterminator was spraying for bugs, and the fumes could make her feel worse. It was the first time I had ever lied to her. Shelby complained about being tired and wanting to go inside, but I reassured her that I would check first before coming to get her. Later, Shelby asked me what was going on, and I reassured her that everything was fine, attributing my discomfort to the odor in the house. I left Shelby with her grandmother, promising to return for her in a couple of hours. I didn't disclose what I had witnessed, simply asking my mom to care for Shelby until I returned from work. Though tempted to return home and confront the cheating duo, I realized I needed more than a mere confrontation. I craved revenge. As I drove back to my office, I began devising plans that would bring ruin upon my wife and her boss indefinitely. The electronics firm, where I worked at multiple divisions, as a senior engineer in the medical equipment division, we shared a large complex with another division specializing in commercial security equipment. Upon reaching my office, I instructed my secretary to ensure I wasn't disturbed for the rest of the afternoon, then called my counterpart in the security division, Dan Taylor, a stellar engineer and longtime friend. Dan agreed to meet promptly. He mentioned he'd already be coming my way to drop off some blueprints for copying. I informed my secretary that Dan could enter my office as soon as he arrived. True to his word, Dan knocked on my door just 20 minutes later. I requested him to come in and close the door. Noting that I needed his help, Dan remarked that I looked like I had seen a ghost, to which I responded by recounting the shocking discovery I had made earlier. I explained to Dan that I had caught my wife and her boss having an affair in our house, specifically in our bedroom. Despite the disbelief, I assured him it was true, detailing how I found them together when I came home to pick up my daughter from school. I refrained from confronting them at the moment, prioritizing my daughter's well-being by having her wait in the car while I quietly left and took her to my mom's house. Dan expressed his sympathy and asked about my plan moving forward. I admitted uncertainty but emphasized the need for evidence, mentioning my intention to gather audio and video recordings of their encounters. I asked Dan to help me acquire security cameras and microphones to discreetly place around the house. Dan questioned the certainty of there being a next time, suggesting the incident might have been isolated. However, I dismissed this possibility, citing conversations between my wife and her boss about regular rendezvous over the past 6 months. I explained my reasoning, noting the lack of alternative locations and the convenience of my empty house during work hours. After a few more minutes of discussion, we delved into the details. Dan mentioned having access to a new experimental line of wireless miniature cameras and microphones compatible with my laptop or home computer. Additionally, he had a small voice-activated recorder I could discreetly place under Sherry's car seat to capture any conversations she might have while driving. It would only record her side of the conversation, but it was better than nothing. I expressed gratitude and informed him I'd collect everything from his office the following day. Returning home that evening proved to be one of the most challenging tasks I'd ever faced. I wasn't sure if I could face my wife and pretend nothing had happened. I decided the best course of action was to make Sherry believe I wasn't feeling well, which was true. I retrieved Shelby from my mom's, and upon arriving home, saw Sherry preparing dinner in the kitchen. Seeing Shelby with me, she became visibly anxious. I questioned Sherry about her whereabouts and why she hadn't informed me about Shelby's illness. Mentioning the message from the school nurse on the answering machine, Sherry explained that she must have accidentally turned off her phone while showing houses and had been busy all day. I cynically thought that she was likely preoccupied with her affairs with her boss, rather than tending to our daughter. Despite this, Sherry hugged Shelby and apologized, helping her to bed. I acknowledged that, despite her flaws, my wife did love our kids, and it seemed I was the obstacle to her happiness. Sherry then returned to the kitchen to prepare soup for Shelby and finish dinner for us. Feeling unwell myself, I informed Sherry that I would sleep in the guest room that night, just in case I was contagious. She noted that I looked pale and felt warm. Silently, I acknowledged the irony of feeling unwell after discovering my wife's affair. Without responding, I headed upstairs, initially dreading entering our master suite, but needing my grooming supplies, toothbrush, and work attire for the next day. I forced myself to enter the room. A window was open, and the scent of intimacy had dissipated. The bed was neatly made. She must have changed the sheets. It pained me to look at it. All I could envision was her boss having been with her there, whispering sweet nothings about belonging to him forever. Anger surged within me, but I suppressed it. I needed to remain composed until I could unleash havoc upon them both, and I would, that much was certain. Gathering my necessities, I retreated to the guest bedroom. Shutting the door behind me, I stripped down to my underwear and slipped into bed. My body felt rigid. I wanted to weep, but I stifled the urge. I had a mission to accomplish, and I couldn't allow emotions to interface. For hours, I lay in the darkness, sleep evading me. After tending to the kids and putting them to bed, my wife entered the room. I pretended to be asleep. She pressed her palm against my forehead before exiting and shutting the door behind her. Sherry typically handled taking the kids to school, so I rose early, showered, and left the house before her awakening. It probably struck her as odd, but I could simply attribute it to needing to compensate for lost time from the previous day when I felt unwell. Frankly, I didn't care much about her opinion at this point. I just wanted to be free from what, until yesterday, I believed was a blissful marriage, founded on lifelong loyalty, honesty, and commitment. How painfully mistaken I was. Arriving at work before the rest of the staff, I brewed a pot of coffee and began outlining my strategies. I realized I needed to cancel our shared credit cards, transfer half of our joint accounts to a separate bank under my sole name, and alter my will, life insurance, and 401k beneficiaries, removing Sherry and naming only Shelby and Ryan. It felt like such a trivial effort to dissolve the last 13 years of my life. It should have been more challenging. Deep down, I suspected it would become harder at some point. I also understood the necessity of securing a competent divorce attorney to protect myself from Sherry's potential exploitation. Being in a no-fault divorce state, infidelity wouldn't significantly affect the financial settlement, but it might aid in retaining custody of my children. Sherry had demonstrated my insignificance in her life, yet she was a devoted mother, and I didn't want to deprive her of her children. I merely sought joint custody to ensure I remained a vital presence in their lives. I fought to suppress thoughts of our love life and the humiliation of overhearing my wife praise her lover's superiority to me in every aspect. If I allowed myself to dwell on it now, I began to doubt myself, which I couldn't afford at the moment. That reckoning would come later, and when it did, it would likely devastate me. With my to-do list complete, I phoned Dan's office. He assured me everything would be ready by noon and offered to assist me in installing and operating the equipment. As I attempted to focus on clearing paperwork from my desk, I noticed Sherry's call on my cell phone. Despite her typically affectionate tone, her voice only fueled my anger this time. Sherry expressed concern about my well-being, mentioning that she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I responded vaguely, stating that I needed to clear my head. She suggested an idea to make me feel better that evening, but internally, I couldn't help but feel resentful and deceived by her lies. However, I kept my response neutral, indicating that we would see. Sherry commented on my apparent lack of interest, to which I replied that I was preoccupied rather than uninterested. We agreed to meet at home by 6 o'clock, and she reassured me that she would be in the office all day if I needed to reach her. I phoned Dan, who confirmed everything was prepared, instructing me to meet him at the loading dock entrance. We loaded all the equipment into Dan's van, and with both of us working on that installation, we had it all set up and tested by 3:30. Then we installed the software on my home office PC and configured a secure folder to collect and store everything captured by the cameras and microphones. We strategically placed bugs in the living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and notably the master suite. ensuring the latter had 4 cameras to capture nearly every activity. As an additional measure, we installed a camera and microphone in the master bathroom, just in case the couple decided to shower together after their encounter. The system was motion activated, with the cameras triggering the microphones. I was prepared. That night was exceptionally challenging for me. After dinner and once the kids were asleep, I followed my wife to our bedroom. I turned away from her and pretended to fall asleep. Sherry noticed the change in our usual routine and asked if everything was all right. I expressed some insecurities about whether I was enough for her, to which she reassured me that I was more than enough and that she couldn't bear anything happening to me. She emphasized that I was her perfect lover. Despite her reassurances, I remained distant and brushed off her concern, stating that nothing was bothering me. I feigned exhaustion, closed my eyes, and attempted to sleep. Later, I heard Sherry softly crying. I felt no sympathy for her, but I pondered whether her tears stemmed from shame for her actions or from feeling mistreated by me. The next morning, I rose before her again and seized the chance to place the voice recorder beneath the seat of her car. I also reviewed the video and audio recordings from the installed equipment, confirming that everything from the previous night was captured clearly, even in the dim nighttime conditions of our bedroom. Initially, Sherry was a bit hurt, mentioning that I had said some hurtful things the night before. Then she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and her demeanor shifted to cheerful. Perhaps it was due to her afternoon plans with her boss. I poured her a cup of coffee and informed her that I'd be locked in my office all day. She mentioned having to show several homes that afternoon and expressed confidence in making a significant sale, but assured me she'd be able to pick up Shelby and Ryan after school. With a peck on her cheek, I headed towards the garage door. Sherry reminded me that I had forgotten to say, "I love you." She emphasized how important it was for her to hear those words from me every morning. I apologized, explaining that there was a lot on my mind, but Sherry insisted that it was important for her to hear those words. I promised not to forget in the future, and with that, I left. Yeah, I'll tell some girl how much I love her, if and when I ever find another girl I can trust enough to fall in love with. The intel Sherry provided about showing homes all afternoon led me to think she'd probably be with her true love. I hoped so. I was tired of games and wanted this ordeal done. I spent the morning working in my office, but kept glancing at my watch. Finally, at noon, I told my secretary I'd be gone for a few hours and put my plan in motion. I borrowed a company van and parked across from my house, waiting to see what happened. It wasn't until nearly 1 o'clock that I saw Sherry's car arrive, open the garage door, and park in her usual spot. When she entered the house without closing the garage, I figured she was either leaving again or expecting someone. 10 minutes later, I realized she was expecting someone, as the same car from the day I caught them pulled into the garage, taking my place just as they had taken my place in my wife's life. I saw him get out of the car, and the garage door closed. I had to give it to them. They had the nerve to meet in my house, in my bed, to carry out their affair. It just proved they thought they wouldn't get caught, or didn't care. Well, they'd soon find out they were wrong. They were caught, and I'd make sure they both cared. With this final proof of my wife's infidelity, and knowing I'd soon have all the visual proof I needed of their affair, I finally let the tears fall. For 13 years, I was convinced my loving wife would never cheat on me, just as I never cheat on her. With the tears came doubts. Was I a better lover? Maybe better looking, but neither of us was exceptional. Why risk our marriages? I desperately wanted to confront them, but why? What would it achieve? I'd catch them, but I'd already done that once. Would I feel better by confronting her lover? Yes, but I'd likely go to jail. By this time, neither of them was worth it. My only worry was how this would affect my kids and his, as I was prepared to confront him just as he had confronted me. By 2:30, they must have finished, as the garage door opened and he left. 15 minutes later, my wife did the same, closing the garage door behind her. I knew she'd return home with the kids by 3:30, so I quickly parked in the garage and made my way to my home office. I didn't want to review all the footage, just ensure the evidence was safely on my hard drive. After 10 minutes, I'd had my fill. It wasn't an exact replay of their previous encounter, but it was explicit. They began by being intimate on the kitchen table, where I ate. They joked about how many times they wondered if I'd ever realize I was dining where he had been close with her so often. Then they moved to our bedroom, though not before her lover suggested using my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife vehemently refused. stating it was off limits to involve the kids' rooms. At least she seemed to have some principles, just not concerning me. In the bedroom, they resumed their activities. I noticed neither of them expressed love, but my wife continued to praise her boss as the best lover she'd ever had. However, I couldn't comprehend why. They then moved to the throw rug by the living room fireplace, where they were intimate once more. When finished, I found it strange that she didn't bother changing the sheets, assuming she would do so when she returned with the kids at 3:30. This gave her plenty of time to air out the room and remove any evidence. Since I rarely arrived home before 6, having secured the evidence I needed on my hard drive, I shut down the system and left the house, without bothering to check the assumed mess on our marriage bed. I'd seen enough, and although my heart was hardened against my wife, I still felt sick inside, a sickness soon replaced by burning anger and hatred. I may have even smiled, knowing the hell I was about to unleash on their cheating heads. Back at work, I briefed Dan on everything. Like me, he couldn't comprehend how a supposedly loving wife like Sherry could do what was now clear. Not only did she break our sacred vows, but she also went out of her way to humiliate me to her lover, always affirming his superiority. All these thoughts plunged my soul into a deep abyss of pain and despair, from which I knew I had to emerge to complete my task of destroying them both. I needed to find a good divorce lawyer, and Dan suggested contacting the law firm the company used for recommendations. I spoke to a corporate lawyer there, who gave me 3 names of divorce lawyers known for protecting husbands' rights. The first one was retiring and not taking new clients, but the second one agreed to meet me the next afternoon at 3 o'clock. With that settled, I resolved to handle canceling credit cards, changing beneficiaries, and transferring funds the next morning. When I returned home that night, Sherry was in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the kids did their homework in their rooms. She wore a yellow sundress and looked beautiful. For a moment, I thought my heart would break all over again. She was smiling and seemed so happy. I assumed it was her usual post-afternoon delight mood. She greeted me and asked about my day, mentioning that hers was great due to making a sale. I responded with mild interest, aware of the reason behind her happiness. I asked if anything else notable happened that day, or if she met any interesting people, to which she denied, stating that she was focused on work to come home to her family. Despite her reassurance, I couldn't shake the suspicion of her affair. As I headed upstairs to change clothes, while changing, I noticed the sheets had been replaced and the room aired out. Upon returning to the kitchen, I mentioned the water on the shower floor and asked if she had showered that afternoon. She appeared startled and denied it, suggesting a possible clogged drain. I speculated about the possibility of someone sneaking into the house for a rendezvous and showering afterward, which seemed to unsettle her. She attempted to brush it off with humor. As dinner progressed, conversation was minimal. I surprised Sherry by switching seats with her, prompting her to question the change. I explained it as a desire for a change of scenery. She appeared puzzled and ate little, mainly moving food around on her plate. During dinner, the kids talked about their day, but Sherry and I mostly listened, making occasional comments. After we all helped clean the dishes, I returned to my office to work on my project. I reviewed footage from that day and selected suitable stills to turn into photographs, which I downloaded to a photo file for printing. Next, I carefully crafted wording for the signs I would create with the photographs. All that remained was to visit my lawyer to initiate the divorce, get my finances in order, and await the next visit from my wife and her lover. When I finally went to bed that night, Sherry was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was fairly certain my actions that evening had given her something to ponder. Not that it mattered. There was nothing she could say or do to change my mind about divorcing her for her infidelity, and there was a small silver lining in the fact that I believed I'd managed to make her at least somewhat uneasy. Today was Tuesday, and she had mentioned making another sale on Thursday, so I took that as a signal that she and her lover would be meeting on that day. That would also mark the day I brought them down. The following morning, I rose early again, showered, and left before Sherry woke up. I had a lot to accomplish and wanted to allocate as much time as possible to get it done. My lawyer appointment wasn't until 3 o'clock, so I had plenty of time to handle all the financial matters first. I visited Human Resources, where I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance and 401k from Sherry to Shelby and Ryan. I received some odd looks from the woman assisting me, but I didn't feel obligated to explain my actions to her or anyone else. Next, I canceled all our joint credit cards and obtained new ones in my name alone. Then, I proceeded to the bank, where I transferred half of the funds from our joint checking and savings accounts to another bank in my name. I knew I needed to address our home, but I presumed the courts would allow Sherry to stay there with the kids, so I postponed action on that front until I consulted with my lawyer. At 3:00, I met with my lawyer. Finding him to be agreeable enough, he cautioned me that, since we were in a no-fault state, Sherry would likely get custody of Shelby and Ryan, and I'd lose the house and half of everything else to my wife. Even with proof of her infidelity, I instructed him on how I wanted the petition written, and when he expressed doubt about my chances of taking nearly everything from her, I reassured him I was confident I could persuade her to agree to whatever I wanted. He wasn't pleased, but he complied with my demands, assuring me he would have everything prepared for her to be served Friday morning. I also had him draft papers to file against her boss and his company for intentionally wrecking my marriage. Those documents would also be ready by Friday morning. I was prepared. When I returned home that evening, I kept my demeanor cool toward Sherry. Frankly, I had reached my limit and just wanted the whole ordeal to end so I could move on with my life. I knew there was still a lot of pain and heartache ahead, but I acknowledged there was no turning back. Besides, I'd finally be sharing the anguish and misery with my unfaithful wife and her despicable lover. After a subdued dinner with minimal conversation, I retired to my study, printed the photos of the lovers I intended to use, and crafted the signs without interruption. I also found time to compose a letter to Greg Allen's wife, enclosing prints of the large photos I planned to use on the posters, informing her that I had plenty of video evidence to provide her in case she decided to divorce her husband, as I was divorcing mine. Shortly after 11:00, I went to our bedroom to ensure Sherry was asleep, then made my way to her car, retrieved the voice-activated recorder from beneath her seat, rewound it, and listened to its contents. I overheard one side of a conversation that sounded like it was with Greg. The caller expressed gratitude for their time together that afternoon and mentioned missing Greg after they were together. They discussed the idea of spending a whole week together and fabricating a story about a real estate convention they must attend. The caller mentioned having to give Jack occasional attention to keep him happy, but expressed a desire to be exclusively with Greg. They confirmed plans for Thursday afternoon and ended the call. I was taken aback to discover that her words didn't sting as much as they had in the past. Perhaps there was still hope for me after all. Little did she realize how soon she would belong solely to him, forever, and the knowledge that I was just one day away from dismantling their comfortable lives filled me with a sense of satisfaction. Revenge, I was realizing, wielded formidable power. I swapped out the tape with a fresh one and returned the recorder under her seat, hoping it would capture evidence of her anguish the next day when her world crumbled. I hardly slept a wink that night, not because I was heartbroken. I had surpassed that. No, my sleeplessness stemmed from the anticipation of everything I hoped would unfold the following day. For the last time, I rose from bed while Sherry continued to slumber. I stood gazing at the woman who had once been my love, the mother of my children, the woman I had imagined spending the rest of my days with. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized I had shared my bed with her for the final time. Never again would our bodies entwine in passion. Never again would we cuddle or discuss our future. Our future was non-existent. And as I turned away from her and departed, I pondered whether she comprehended the toll she was about to pay for betraying me. She as likely didn't, but she would soon learn. After showering, I left the house, stopped for breakfast at a diner, then briefly swung by work to inform my secretary of my absence for the day. I phoned Dan and briefed him on the impending events. He wished me luck, cautioned me to be cautious, and requested that I keep him updated on the proceedings. I made a brief visit to my lawyer's office to ensure all was in order for serving my wife and Greg Ellen the following day. Following that, I called my wife to arrange picking up the kids from school. My mother had expressed a desire to have them for the long weekend, since they had no school on Friday. Thus, I planned to swing by the house around 3:45 to gather some belongings and transport the kids directly to my mom's. She enthusiastically approved, even suggesting we spend Saturday in bed together in her most seductive tone. I agreed nonchalantly before ending the call. I had reached a point where I couldn't tolerate her deceit any longer. I took my time returning home. By 12:30, I was parked nearby, awaiting the imminent events. My car was mostly concealed from view, but I had a clear line of sight to any vehicle entering my driveway. I didn't need to witness the garage door's movements. My wife and her lover were nothing if not predictable, and I was familiar with their routine. At 12:50, Sherry's car rolled into the driveway, followed 5 minutes later by Greg Allen. The trap was set, and I was poised to ensnare them. I should have felt anguish, knowing my wife and her boss were engaging in pleasure in our marital bed, while I waited around the corner for them to finish. Yet, she had lost her ability to inflict pain upon me. It was astonishing how composed I felt as I envisioned the activities I knew they were engaging in together. It was almost reminiscent of recalling a low-budget adult film, lacking in substance but with a satisfying conclusion. Around 10 minutes to 3, I observed Alan's car reverse out of the driveway and depart. 10 minutes later, Sherry followed suit sweetly. As she drove off, I observed her applying fresh lipstick. Once they were out of sight, I pulled into my garage and shut the door. With limited time on my hands, I headed to my office and reviewed the footage from that afternoon's encounter. Everything was captured, including the hurtful insults about his superiority in bed compared to me. However, this time, their words didn't affect me. After ensuring the footage was securely stored on my hard drive, I spent the next 10 minutes carrying my handcrafted signs adorned with their photographs upstairs and positioning them near the front door for easy access. Then I packed essentials like a toothbrush and clothes for Shelby and Ryan into my car. The only remorse I felt about my impending actions was for the pain I was about to inflict on my beloved children. Yet I found solace in knowing I hadn't caused the pain of their parents' separation. That responsibility rested solely on their mother's shoulders. She chose to engage in a prolonged affair, ultimately tearing our family apart. At 3:15, I drove to their school and was waiting when the final bell rang to pick them up. I informed them they'd spend the weekend with Grandma, which thrilled them given her penchant for spoiling them. 45 minutes later, I dropped them off and returned home, ready to set my plan in motion. And thus we come full circle to where we began. Bed, table, and rug displayed on the lawn, adorned with signs, watched by neighbors, awaiting Sherry's return to the dreadful truth that I held all the knowledge. That night, I expected to hear from Sherry, but I didn't. There was a late call from her cell phone, but when I answered, silence greeted me. An hour after Sherry departed, the police paid me a visit. While understanding, they insisted I remove the signs and photographs to avoid disturbing the peace and public indecency charges. I complied. They served their purpose, seen by my wife, and from the look on her face before I turned away, I knew her life had begun its descent into chaos. That evening, I drowned my sorrows in a substantial amount of Maker's Mark and drifted into an alcoholic stupor. Friday morning greeted me with a monstrous hangover. Yet, despite it, I felt empowered. Though saddened and alone, I found strength in knowing I had subdued my anger long enough to exact revenge on my unfaithful wife and her lover. By noon, I glanced out the front window to find the rug, kitchen table, and bed gone, leaving only the mattress and stained sheets behind. I'd dispose of those later. The morning passed uneventfully, but by 3:00 in the afternoon, chaos erupted. I was certain that Greg Allen's wife had received the letter and photographs that morning, and my lawyer had informed me that both Sherry and Greg Allen, along with his partners, had been served at their workplaces. He recounted how Sherry collapsed in tears upon being served, while Greg Allen disregarded her. Unleashing threats against me, his partners retreated behind closed doors for 15 minutes before emerging to present Sherry with her final check and informing Greg that his partnership was terminated. When he informed them of his refusal to sell to them, they cited their corporate bylaws and morality clause regarding romantic fraternization with staff members. This provision empowered them to sever all ties with him and his mistress. Meanwhile, the receptionist at the front desk relayed that Greg's wife was on the phone urgently requesting to speak with him. She had received the letter and photos I had sent, informing him not to return home and notifying him of her intent to file for divorce the following day. Later, I was informed by one of the agency employees' husbands that after Ellen was escorted out of the building, everyone turned their backs on my soon-to-be ex-wife. She remained on the floor for about 30 minutes, crying inconsolably. Eventually, she gathered herself enough to leave, though no one knew her whereabouts. The next day, Sherry finally called me, sounding distraught. She inquired about the children and whether they knew about the situation. I assured her they were safe at my mother's and wouldn't hear the details from me. She thanked me for my discretion and asked to retrieve some belongings, to which I agreed, offering to leave for a few hours. She requested to stay and talk, but I declined, leading to more tears from her. She pleaded for my understanding, expressing remorse and claiming she never intended to hurt me. I laughed at her apology, questioning how she could claim innocence when she had expressed love and longing for her lover. Comparing him favorably to me, I accused her of betraying me with her words to him, saying I had recordings of her confessing these feelings. Despite her denial, I insisted that her words were recorded, and nothing she said could change how I felt about her. She professed her love for me, claiming she had always loved only me and didn't understand why she said those things to Greg. She explained that she had done it to boost his ego because he complained about his wife. I questioned her explanation, pointing out that she had torn me down to him and had been with him for 6 months. She insisted she never meant to hurt me and didn't mean any of it. When I pressed her for an explanation, she admitted that it felt dirty with Greg and that she felt she should be dirty with him, keeping it separate from what she had with me, which she described as loving and clean. I expressed disbelief at her actions and called her sick, admitting my own foolishness for not seeing it sooner. She begged for a chance to make it right, insisting that she loved only me and belonged to me. She pleaded for forgiveness and offered to come to me immediately, begging me not to leave her. I informed Sherry that I no longer loved her and that she was the one who left me. I condemned her actions with Greg over the past 6 months, stating that her behavior proved she didn't love me. I expressed disgust toward her and eagerly awaited her departure from my life. I rejected any possibility of reconciliation, expressing my disdain for her after what she had done with Greg. I emphasized that any future interaction would only be for the sake of our children, whom she had also hurt deeply. I explained that while I wanted to spare our children pain, I had no intention of sparing her any consequences for her actions. I wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused me and Greg's wife. When she questioned why I told Greg's wife about their affair, I retorted that what she and Greg did was unfair to me and our children. I justified informing Greg's wife by highlighting the destruction of my family, the betrayal of our marital vows, and the need for Greg's wife to know the truth. Sherry expressed her desire to fight for our marriage, stating that she didn't want a divorce. I responded by saying there was nothing left to fight for, and that I would rather die than remain married to her. I accused her of being delusional and out of her mind. She urged me to read the divorce petition she served me with, claiming that if I agreed to joint custody for our children, I could stay in the house and receive half of our assets. However, she threatened to share the videos of her affair if I didn't agree to her terms. When I doubted her willingness to follow through with the threat, she insisted that she could and would do it out of hatred toward me. She pleaded with me to sign the divorce papers, but I remained firm in my decision. In the end, she begged me to sign the papers, but I refused, insisting that she should sign them instead. After hanging up on her, Sherry signed the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized in 6 months. She now lives with Shelby and Ryan in our former home, while I reside in a nearby condo. Despite the divorce, we remained in the same school district to minimize disruption for the kids, although they still felt the pain of the breakup. Shelby disclosed that their mother acknowledged her mistake, accepting that our marriage couldn't overcome it. However, we reassured the kids that we would always be there for them. As for what Sherry told her parents and sister about the breakup, I'm uncertain, but they still communicate with me, indicating she likely didn't place blame solely on me. My mother perceived the divorce as something neither Sherry nor I could move past. I have the chance to retrieve the audio recorder from Sherry's car one last time, capturing a memorable conversation. She called Greg and thanked him for their time together, expressing concern about my suspicions and suggesting they pause their affair temporarily. Upon arriving home, she discovered signs and photographs revealing my knowledge of her infidelity, leading to her panic and realization of the consequences. She called Greg in distress, informing him that I knew everything about their affair, and broke down into tears. It's been over a year since we endured those trying times, and gradually I'm beginning to piece things back together. I still steer clear of dating, and will likely continue to do so for a while. The idea of reliving what I've just gone through makes me wary of diving into another serious relationship. Shelby mentioned that her mom went on one date but returned home in tears and, as far as she knows, hasn't dated since. Sherry found work as a receptionist in a retirement village and has put a real estate career on hold, at least for now. I've never found out if she keeps in touch with Greg Allen, and frankly, I don't care. Greg Allen and his wife divorced, and he's been struggling to find employment. Even though I didn't share the videos of their encounters with anyone, Sherry knew I wasn't sympathetic towards Greg. It seems many businesses are wary of hiring someone with a reputation for seducing married women and causing marriages to dissolve. Although I blurred Sherry's face in the videos, I retained all the audio. I recently heard that Greg's ex-wife is dating a kind police officers, and it appears to be serious good for her. Speaking of Greg's former employer, to avoid negative publicity, they offered me a generous settlement to prevent a lawsuit. I accepted. As far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed. For now, my focus is solely on my children and their future. Perhaps one day my own future will take precedence.